The call light was still blinking when the charge nurse handed my husband the visitor log. I wasn't in the room when it happened. I was 2 floors up in a hospital bed, relearning how to breathe without a monitor screaming at me. But later, my coworker Denise described it in the kind of detail that only someone deeply satisfied by justice can manage. She said my husband's face didn't fall all at once. It went in stages, the way a building comes down. First confusion, then recognition, then something that looked almost like fear. She said he read the name on the log, the way you read a word you recognize, but can't believe is in the sentence. The name was Caleb Marsh. He'd come the first night, the second. Every night after that, right up until the morning, my husband drove back from Sedona with a tan and a carry-on full of dirty resort clothes and the specific energy of someone who had already decided they were the victim in this story. I didn't know any of that yet when it started. I only knew the ceiling of Bay 4 in the ER where I worked, which is not the same as the ceiling of any other room in the hospital. And I know this because I was lying on that specific gurney staring at it while my coworkers worked around me trying very hard to stay professional about the fact that one of their own had just hit the floor in the middle of a shift. My name is Maya. I'm 31 years old. I've been an ER nurse for 6 years, and for the last 3 of those years, I've been the kind of person who eats protein bars over a sink and calls it dinner, who texts her husband's mother back before she texts her own, who transfers money she doesn't have to a joint account she stopped benefiting from without anyone noticing the math was broken. I didn't plan to be that person. I'm not sure anyone does. My husband Derek and I got married when I was 27. He was charming in the way that reads as ambitious until you realize it's actually just restless. He worked in sales, which is the polite word for a job that is entirely dependent on how many favors you can ask before people stop picking up. In the first year, the income was inconsistent. I covered the gap. In the second year, he switched industries. I covered the gap. In the third year, his mother Sandra's roof needed replacing, and Derek looked at me with that expression he'd perfected, the one where concern and expectation are wearing each other's clothes, and said, "She doesn't have anyone else." Sandra had a daughter. Bree was 24 and spent most of her time doing things that were described to me as finding herself, which, as far as I could tell, involved a great deal of spending money and very little earning it. She was the one Sandra called first and loved loudest, the one Derek spoke about with a softness he didn't have for much else. Bree needs this. Bree is trying. Bree is so talented if she could just catch a break. I caught my own breaks. That's not something anyone in Derek's family understood about me. Or if they did, they decided understanding it wasn't useful to them. The money I made as an ER nurse is not theoretical. It is shift work and night differentials and holiday pay and the specific tax bracket of someone who never calls in sick because calling in sick means someone else carries the load, and I have never been able to make myself do that to a coworker. Over 3 years, I calculated it once in a notebook I kept in my locker at work where no one would find it. I had covered $74,000 in expenses that were not mine. Derek's business relaunch, Sandra's roof, and then Sandra's car, Bree's move to Portland, and then Bree's move back from Portland. The credit card that was supposed to be for emergencies, that was never once used for anything I would classify as an emergency. I wrote the number down and then I put the notebook back in the locker and I kept going to work because I didn't know what else to do with the information. The warning signs were the kind that announce themselves only in retrospect. My hands developed a tremor that I told myself was caffeine. I started forgetting which patients I'd already medicated. Just for a half second, just a flicker. But in an ER, a half second is a different unit of measurement than it is anywhere else. I had headaches that arrived behind my right eye every afternoon like something knocking to be let out. I slept through my alarm twice in a month. I had never in 6 years slept through my alarm. The night it happened, I was 14 hours into a 12-hour shift because we were short-staffed and because I had said yes when the supervisor asked, the way I always said yes, because the alternative felt worse than the exhaustion. There was a man in Bay 7 with chest pain we hadn't cleared yet. A kid in Bay 2 who needed a second IV attempt because the first had blown. A woman in the waiting room who'd been there 4 hours and was starting to raise her voice, which I understood completely and couldn't do anything about. I was moving between all 3 of them in the particular rhythm of a busy ER night. the one that hums underneath everything and keeps you upright even when you can't feel your feet. I was reaching across the supply cart when the floor came up to meet me. That's not a metaphor. The floor actually rose, or the room tilted, or my body simply declined to continue negotiating. I grabbed the cart, and it rolled, and I went down with a sound I was told later was loud enough to bring Denise running from 2 bays over. She said my eyes were open, but that nobody was home. She said she called my name 4 times before I responded to any of it. I don't remember that part. I remember the cart. I remember thinking about the man in Bay 7 and whether anyone would remember to recheck his troponin. Then I remember a different ceiling. They admitted me with a diagnosis that took 3 syllables to say and meant that my body had been running on reserves. It didn't have, and had finally presented me with the bill. Severe burnout with cardiac involvement was how the hospitalist explained it, which sounds clinical until you're the one wearing the gown and watching your own heart rate on a monitor, and understanding that you ran yourself into the ground so gradually that you didn't notice until you were underground. I was awake by the time they called Derek, or someone called him. I don't know who made the call. I know that when he appeared in my room, it was already the next morning, which meant he'd slept before he came, which I filed away in the part of my mind that keeps receipts. He looked worried in the way people look worried when they want credit for looking worried. He stood at the foot of the bed and asked how I was feeling, and I said I didn't know yet, and he nodded as if that was the correct answer. Then he told me about the wedding. His cousin Tara was getting married in Sedona that weekend. The whole family was going. Flights were booked. The resort was non-refundable. Sandra had been talking about it for 4 months. Bree was the maid of honor. It was, he said, a really big deal for the family. I looked at him from the hospital bed with a monitor on my finger and an IV in my arm, and I said nothing, because I was waiting for him to arrive at the obvious conclusion on his own. He didn't. "You're stable," he said finally. "The doctor said you're stable. It's only 4 days." The word stable has a very specific meaning in medicine, and it does not mean fine. I know this because I am a nurse, and also because I was the one who was not fine. But I understood that Derek had decided stable was the threshold, and I didn't have the energy to argue medical semantics from a hospital bed. "What about my mother?" I asked. Derek's expression shifted in a way I had learned to translate. "She's already planning her travel," he said. "She can't cancel now." "Right," I said. "I'll have my phone," he said. "You can call any time." "Right," I said again. He left the next morning. He didn't bring flowers. He didn't bring the things from home that I'd asked for. My own pillow, the book on my nightstand, the charger that fit my phone. He said he'd forgotten. He kissed my forehead with the efficiency of someone checking a box and walked out. And I listened to his footsteps go down the hallway, and I stared at the ceiling, and I tried to locate a feeling and came up mostly empty. That afternoon, my phone lit up with a photo. It was Derek at the resort pool, holding a drink that was decorated with something tropical, grinning at the camera with the full, easy confidence of a man on vacation. He'd captioned it just landed, "Missing you already," but his eyes in the photo were not missing anything. His eyes were exactly where they wanted to be. I turned the phone face down on the blanket and closed my eyes. That night, I asked my night nurse how many visitors I'd had. She was young, newer, the kind of careful that comes from still learning the job. Her name was Priya, and she had the handwriting of someone who had taken notes seriously her entire life. She looked at the log with the particular expression of someone trying to be neutral and said, "Your husband was here yesterday morning." "I know about him," I said. "Anyone else?" Priya hesitated in a way I recognized from my own practice, the half second before you say something true that might complicate things. "There was a man," she said. "He came around 9. He asked which room you were in, but he didn't come in. He just stood in the hallway for a while." I sat with that for a moment. What did he look like? Priya described him with the specificity of someone who had paid attention. Tall, dark jacket, about my age, quiet the way she said wasn't rude, just careful, like he was trying not to take up space he hadn't been invited into. Did he leave a name? She checked the log. "Just a first name," she said. "Caleb." I hadn't heard that name in almost 4 years. Caleb Marsh and I had been close in nursing school, the kind of close that forms in high-pressure environments where you're working on 4 hours of sleep and practicing IV sticks on each other and eating bad vending machine sandwiches at midnight before clinical. We had been study partners first, Then friends? Then the kind of friends where the line is less of a line and more of a suggestion. Nothing happened. He was careful about that. More careful than I was, if I'm being honest. He said once that he didn't want to be the reason anything got complicated for me. Derek had not liked him. Not in the loud way, not confrontationally, but in the patient, erosive way that water works on stone. Little comments, observations about how much time we spent together, questions about what we were really to each other. He never asked me to stop being Caleb's friend directly. He just made being Caleb's friend feel like something I was doing to him rather than something I had for myself. By the time I graduated and started at the hospital, the calls had thinned out. Then a move. Then the numbers in my phone went to voicemail long enough that calling back started to feel like an explanation I wasn't sure how to give. Then nothing. I hadn't thought about him in a long time, which is the kind of sentence that is only true on the surface. "I'm going to ask you something," I said to Priya. "And I need you to answer me straight." She nodded once. "Is he still coming?" She looked at the log. "He was here last night too," she said. "And the night before, 3 nights. 3 nights while Derek sent photos of resort pools and Bree tagged everyone in wedding venue stories, and Sandra left me 2 voicemails I hadn't listened to yet, and Caleb Marsh had been standing in the hallway outside my room in the dark. Why isn't he coming in?" I asked. Priya's expression did something careful. "He said he wasn't sure you'd want him to." That night, I lay awake for a long time, thinking about a person who drove to a hospital, found the right floor, stood outside a glass door, and decided that respecting my uncertainty was more important than his own need to be useful. I've worked in emergency medicine for 6 years. I know what it looks like when someone shows up. I know even better what it looks like when they don't. On the 4th night I saw him. I was awake past midnight because sleep had not been cooperating, and the hallway was quieter than it is during the day, the specific quiet of a hospital at night, where everything is tamped down, except the things that can't be. I looked toward the glass panel beside my door, and there was a figure in the hallway, standing still, hands in the pockets of a dark jacket. I reached over and turned on the small lamp beside the bed. He looked up. Even through the glass, even at a distance, I knew him. He looked older than I remembered. Not badly, just more settled. The way people look when they've stopped waiting for their real life to start. I lifted my hand. He nodded once. The same nod you give someone across a crowded room when you want them to know you see them. Then he sat down in the chair outside my door like he'd decided on something. He was still there when I fell asleep. In the morning, I asked Priya to let him in. He came through the door with the careful movement of a large person in a small space. He looked at the monitors first, the way medical people do, and I could tell by the slight release in his shoulders when he'd taken inventory of the readouts, and decided I wasn't actively in crisis. "You look terrible," he said, "which is how you know someone actually sees you." "I've been better," I said. "Sit down." He pulled the chair close, but not too close, and sat with his elbows on his knees, watching me with the expression I remembered from study sessions when he was working through a hard problem. "How did you know I was here?" I asked. "Denise called me," he said. "You still had me in your work contacts. She thought you should have someone." I thought about Denise, who I had worked beside for 4 years, and who had never once mentioned that she knew Caleb. I filed this away for later. "Why every night?" I said. "You didn't come in. You just sat out there." He was quiet for a moment. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me," he said, "but I couldn't not come. There's something about that particular logic, the I couldn't not, that bypasses every argument. I've heard a lot of reasons from a lot of people over the years. I couldn't help it. I had no choice. I was busy. I couldn't not is different. It means the absence was worse than the risk of showing up. We didn't say much that first visit. We didn't need to cover 4 years in one morning. He asked if I needed anything from home, and I gave him the actual list, my pillow, the charger, the book, the things Derek had forgotten. He didn't make a face about any of it. He just wrote it down in the notes app on his phone and said he'd be back in the afternoon. He was. The day Derek came back was the 5th day after he'd left for Sedona. He appeared in my room mid-morning with the particular energy of someone who has already rehearsed this conversation in the car. He was tan. His hair had gotten sun in it. He looked rested in a way that registered somewhere below my sternum as information. He stopped when he saw my pillow and the book and the charger on the bedside table. His eyes moved to the small bunch of flowers in a plastic cup on the windowsill, the kind you buy from a hospital gift shop when you think of it on the way in. He hadn't bought them. "Who brought those?" he said. "A friend," I said. His jaw moved. "Which friend?" I looked at him evenly. "What do you need, Derek?" He redirected with the skill of someone who had practice. "I'm here to take you home," he said. "The doctor said you could discharge today." "The doctor said I could discharge when I'm ready," I said. "Not the same thing." "Maya." His voice carried the particular tone that was meant to remind me I was being difficult. "You've been here almost 2 weeks. You're fine now." 2 weeks, I said. I repeated it calmly. "I was in a hospital bed for 2 weeks. You were stable," he said, and I almost laughed at how easily that word returned to him. "Tell me something," I said. "Did Sandra ask about me? When you were at the wedding?" His eyes shifted. "Of course she did. What did she ask?" He paused. "She asked if you were okay." "Once?" He didn't answer. "Did Bree ask?" He picked up the flower cup and set it down somewhere else, a rearranging gesture that had nothing to do with the flowers. She was dealing with the wedding stuff. "Right," I said. "And you? In 4 days, how many times did you call?" "Maya, I'm asking." He pressed his mouth together. "A few times." 3 times, I said. I counted. "You called 3 times in 4 days, all before noon your time, and 2 of them were under 4 minutes. He made the face he made when he decided I was cataloging grievances unfairly. "That's not—" "And you sent me a photo of yourself at the pool," I said, "with a drink in your hand. While I was here, I was trying to keep the mood light," he said. "Light," I repeated. "You were stable. I didn't want you lying here feeling guilty about ruining the trip." I absorbed that for a moment. "I ruined the trip," I said, "by being hospitalized." "That's not what I said." "That's exactly what you said." He moved toward the chair by the bed, the one Caleb had been sitting in every morning, and I had the sudden sharp awareness that I didn't want him in it. He sat down anyway. "Maya." His voice dropped into what I thought of as the reasonable register, the one that was supposed to make me feel like I was the problem that needed solving. "We need to talk about where we go from here. The mortgage is due. I've got the Henderson account I've been working on. Things can't just stop because I was in the hospital," I said. He tilted his head. "I'm not the bad guy here." "No," I said. "Nobody's the bad guy. That's the story you like. But here's the other story. I have worked triple shifts for 3 years. I have covered $74,000 in expenses that were not mine. I have said yes when I should have said no so many times that my body physically stopped and lay down on a hospital floor because it had run out of ways to get my attention." His eyes flickered. 74. "I kept a record," I said. "I know you didn't think I would." "That's our money," he said. "We're married." "We're married," I agreed, which is interesting, because when I was lying here by myself for 2 weeks, it felt less like a partnership and more like a salary. He stood up, which is what he did when conversations left the territory he'd prepared for. "That's not fair." A nurse appeared in the doorway. Not Priya, a different one, daytime staff. She had the expression of someone who has heard enough through a door to understand the shape of things. "Mrs. Reeves," she said, "your discharge paperwork. We need to go over your at-home care instructions." Derek turned toward her with the automatic authority of a person used to running meetings. "I'll handle that. We're ready to go." The nurse's gaze went to me. The decision was made in about 2 seconds. "Actually," I said, "I haven't decided on discharge yet. Can you give us a few minutes?" Derek's expression rearranged. "I'm sorry?" I looked at him. "I changed my emergency contact," I said. 2 days ago. You're not on my medical decisions anymore. The hospital has the paperwork." He went very still. "I needed someone who was actually reachable," I said. "Not someone at a resort. Maya." His voice had gone careful in a new way, a way that meant he was recalculating. "I want you to leave the room," I said. "I'll call you when I've talked to the doctor." He didn't move right away. He did the thing he did when he wanted me to feel the weight of his disapproval, the held silence that was supposed to press on me until I adjusted. I sat in it and felt nothing except a strange lightness, the way you feel when you've been carrying something heavy for so long that putting it down feels like a different kind of wrong before it feels like relief. Then he left. The nurse waited until his footsteps faded. Then she said, very neutrally, I'll let Dr. Ferris know you're ready to discuss discharge planning. Thank you, I said. She nodded, and before she turned to go, she reached over and moved the flower cup back to the windowsill. Sandra arrived 20 minutes later. She had driven herself, which I noted because Sandra called Derek for rides to her own doctor appointments. Her hair was done, and she was wearing a dress I recognized from the wedding photos Bree had posted. She came in like she owned the room, the way she came into most rooms, with the assumption that her presence was the thing everyone had been waiting for. "Maya," she said, and her voice had the particular warmth it got when she needed something. "You look thin." "Hospitals will do that," I said. She sat in the chair by the bed. She didn't look at the flowers or the pillow or any of the evidence of someone else's presence. She was focused with the intensity of a person who had rehearsed a speech. "Derek is very worried about you," she said. "Derek is worried about the mortgage," I said. "I think there's a difference." Her mouth tightened. "You're being unkind. I'm being accurate." She folded her hands in her lap, which she did when she was moving from warmth to pressure. "You're part of this family, Maya. We love you. You love what I contribute to the family," I said. "That's not the same thing." The words surprised her. She recovered. "That's not true. You're like a daughter to me." I looked at her for a long moment. "How many times did you call when I was in here?" She blinked. I sent a message. One message," I said. "In 2 weeks. And Bree?" Sandra's expression shifted into something that was almost defensive on Bree's behalf, which told me everything I needed. "She was in a wedding," she said. "You know how much that meant to her." "I know how much it meant to her," I said. "I helped pay for the dress she wore in it." Sandra went very still. "I have records," I said. "I'm not angry. I'm just done pretending the math doesn't exist." "You don't understand what this family has been through," Sandra said, and her voice had changed, gone smaller and harder at the same time. "You're right," I said. "I only know what I saw from the outside, and what I saw was that when I needed someone here, the visitor log has one name in it that I didn't put there, and it's not any of yours." She looked at the door. "Who came?" "Someone who remembered that I was here," I said. Sandra's chin lifted. "If you're talking about that man, Derek mentioned—" "I was talking about a friend," I said. "Someone who showed up every night while your family was in Sedona." Sandra looked at me with the calculation of someone deciding whether to escalate or retreat. Then she did what people do when they've run out of leverage. She brought up money. "The roof repair," she said. "We still owe you for the second installment." "No," I said. She blinked. "What?" "You don't owe me," I said. "I'm canceling the balance." Her face softened with relief, which was the wrong reaction, and she realized it a beat too late. "Because we're done," I said. "The account you and Derek have access to is already closed. I did it 3 days ago." The silence in the room changed quality. "Maya," she started. "I'm not making a scene," I said. "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm just stopping. I should have stopped 2 years ago. My body stopped for me." She stood up. She smoothed her dress. She looked at me the way people look at something that has stopped being useful, assessing, recalibrating. Then she said, "You'll regret this when you need family." "Maybe," I said, "but I needed family 2 weeks ago." And the chair beside my bed was empty. She left without saying goodbye, which told me the love she'd described had the kind of conditions attached that made it not quite love. Caleb came that afternoon. He didn't know about any of it yet. He came in the way he'd been coming, careful and without ceremony, with a coffee from the place down the street that he'd figured out I preferred. He stopped when he read the room. "What happened?" he said. I told him. Not dramatically, not performing any of it, just the version of events that was true. Derek, Sandra, the account, the discharge, all of it. He listened the way good nurses listen, without inserting himself, without fixing things before I'd finished saying them. When I was done, he was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel?" he said. "Like I'm going to throw up," I said. He almost smiled. "That's your nervous system catching up. My coworkers say that too," I said. "It's true." I stared at the flowers on the windowsill. "You didn't have to come every night," I said. He wrapped both hands around his own coffee cup. "I know. It was a risk. Derek could have been here. He thought about this. I know that too." "Then why?" He looked at me with the expression I remembered from the time in our second year when I'd failed a practical exam and sat in the hallway outside the lab, not crying, but close. And he'd come out after, and just sat beside me without saying anything about what I should do differently or how I'd be fine, just sat there and stayed. Because, he said, you were here and someone should be. It is a very specific thing, to be seen without being solved. I have spent 3 years living in a house where love was expressed in the form of requests, and I had forgotten that it can also be expressed in the form of presence. I signed my discharge papers 2 days later, on my timeline, with Dr. Ferris reviewing everything and Priya going over the home care instructions at a pace I could follow. Caleb drove me home. My home, the apartment I'd been paying for mostly by myself for years, which I was now going to be paying for entirely by myself, and which felt, for the first time in a long time, like a place that belonged to me. Derek had taken his things while I was signing paperwork. He'd left neatly, which I thought was probably the kindest version of how it could have gone. He'd left a note on the kitchen counter that said he was sorry things got this way. I stood in the kitchen and read it, and then I put it in the recycling, and I stood in the quiet of my own apartment and listened to nothing. Caleb carried in the bag from the hospital and set it by the door. "Do you want me to go?" he said. "No," I said. He nodded once. We sat on the couch with the window open, the kind of afternoon light that comes in sideways and makes everything look briefly like it was painted. Neither of us tried to explain 4 years all at once. We just sat in it, two people who had found their way back from the long way around. The guilt arrived in the evenings, for a while. The specific guilt of someone who was trained to feel responsible for everyone else's comfort and was now in the process of unlearning that training. I'd reach for my phone to check if Derek had called, or start calculating what Sandra might need, or feel the phantom weight of a financial obligation that no longer existed. My therapist, who I finally started seeing 2 weeks after discharge, called it a withdrawal pattern. She said the body gets used to the adrenaline of always being needed. She said recovery from burnout and recovery from a particular kind of relationship look very similar from the inside. I believe her. I am still in the middle of both. What I know now, standing on the other side of a thing I thought might break me, is something I should have understood years earlier about my own profession. In triage, you assess by what the patient actually needs, not by what they're asking for. Derek needed a fixer. Sandra needed a fund. Bree needed an audience. None of them needed me. They needed the function I performed, and when I stopped performing it, I stopped existing to them in any meaningful way. Caleb showed up to the hospital on a Tuesday night with nothing to gain. He didn't come because I could do something for him. He came because I was there, and he couldn't not. I've spent 6 years working in an environment where the most important thing you can learn is the difference between a patient who is stable and a patient who is okay. Stable means the numbers aren't alarming. Okay means the person is actually all right. I was stable for a long time. Empty chairs, wrong pillows, a photo of a pool with a drink in it, a text that said I was missing you in the same breath that meant you're fine. I wasn't okay. I understand the difference now. Caleb makes coffee in the morning, leaves it on the counter, doesn't announce it. He asks how I slept and means it. He doesn't borrow against me. When I say I'm tired, he doesn't calculate what that costs him. I'm learning to let that be enough. I'm learning that it is actually more than enough. It is in fact what the whole thing was supposed to feel like. My mother asked me recently if I was lonely now, by which she meant she'd heard about the separation and was working up to something. I thought about it genuinely before I answered. "No," I said. "For the first time in a long time, I'm not." She didn't understand that. I don't think I need her to. There's a version of this story where I became someone who was closed off, who calculated everything, who stopped trusting because trusting had cost me. I understand how people get there. I was halfway there myself, lying in that hospital bed in those first few days, watching an empty chair and adding up everything it represented. But then there was a man in a dark jacket standing in a hallway every night who had decided that my uncertainty about whether I wanted to see him was less important than making sure I wasn't alone. And something about that specific kindness, unasked for and uncalculated and unglamorous, tipped me towards something other than closed. I'm still an ER nurse. I still say yes more than I probably should when the floor is short. I'm working on it. My therapist has a sticker on her notebook that says progress, not perfection, and I used to find it a little much, and now I have it on my locker at work. Small things. That's mostly how it goes. I walked past Sandra's street last month, Not intentionally, just how routes work in a city where you lived somewhere for a long time. I didn't stop. I noticed the roof, which was still standing, which was never not going to be standing. It was always just a roof. I drove past and I felt nothing dramatic, only the mild and fading sense of a debt that has been settled. I turned on the radio and I went home. Home, these days, is a place where the chair beside the bed is never empty. I'm learning, slowly, not to be surprised by that.